Consider this, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome again to the University of Nebraska at Omaha. There is an issue that seems to be just mushrooming in the United States. It was slow to bubble, but now it's just sort of mushroomed. This week on Consider This, I'm welcoming the Executive Director of the ACLU Nebraska, and the issue is stun guns. And yes. I did a Google and on Google News so that you get what the latest, and story after story of departments large and small wondering if they should reconsider maybe not the total use of stun guns, but certainly how and when they're used.
Right. Stun guns are a very powerful weapon.
How many volts is it?
It's 50,000 volts of electricity, but it's at a low amperage so that it doesn't kill someone.
And then it has some little like fish hook things that are sort of...
The gun uses nitrogen, compressed nitrogen, to fire two darts that go into the person's body.
And so to carry that electrical charge.
Right, and then they're attached to wires going back to the gun, and the officer can then administer electric shock to the person. The shock itself is sufficient to disrupt the signals to the muscle so that literally the person collapses. They have no control over their muscles at all. I used to say that they were turned into a pool of jello, but that's not true. Really, it makes their body rigid, and they have no control at all, and down they go. And if one bursts, they call them drive stuns. If one drive isn't sufficient, and it's a 5-second blast of electricity, the probes allow the officer to continue zapping the person as many times as they want. That's great for control in some situations, but in the hands of the wrong person, of course, it can literally, in the words of Amnesty International, become a weapon of torture.
Well, we're going to talk about that. I should mention that this is sort of precipitated locally by a few things that have happened. You, as director of the ACLU, received some complaints from defense attorneys in the Hastings area.
Right.
And maybe about how their clients were taken into custody and the use of the taser. And then this past week, the Omaha Public Safety Auditors Advisory Committee, of which you are a member, held a forum, and it was you and the Chief of Police, which is a very highly unusual thing.
Yeah, the Chief Warren deserves a lot of credit for being willing to come out and meet the public and talk about an issue of growing controversy. I can't think of any of his predecessors that would have ever done that, and I have a lot of respect for his willingness to engage in a public dialogue over a controversial issue. That being said, he and I don't see eye to eye on the issue,
right,
of course.
And we'll talk about the specifics. Also there, and I was surprised, maybe you weren't, that one of the co-founders of Taser International, which is one of two companies that makes the devices used by law enforcement, these stun devices, was there to answer questions, obviously based on their point of view and what they feel is the good evidence that they've gathered or others have done.
Right.
But the interesting thing is that it was a pretty cool forum. Good questions, but it wasn't, I think for the first time in a long time when an issue of use of force in Omaha particular, and I cannot speak for other cities, where there was real concerns and that maybe people were at odds, that it was that informational as opposed to confrontational.
And that was the purpose that the Police Auditors Advisory Committee had for the forum, was to get information out, to let people hear two sides of a story so that they could make up their own mind. Mr. Smith, the co-founder of Taser International, was a last-minute addition. Originally, when it was planned, it was going to be just Chief Warren and myself, and about 4 hours before the forum, the chief called me up and said, would you mind if Mr. Smith is on the panel, and I'd like to bring one of my training instructors also. And because it wasn't a debate, it was an opportunity for full open discussion. I said, sure, that's fine. Let's have every voice take part in this dialogue so that the public can be best informed.
Okay, let's get down to some of the nitty-gritty. You sort of opened up the actual portion between you and the city, so to speak, and you have put together some statistics based on queries that you made regarding, well, the statistics gathered by the Omaha Police Department.
Right. We didn't create the data. We asked the Omaha Police to supply us with their annual use of force reports. Every year in January, they go back, they look at how officers used force in the prior 12 months, and they compile a summary. And they report the things that they think are significant, and that's the use of firearms, batons, mace, chokeholds. And now with the addition of tasers in 2004, they reported 1 year of taser use.
And there's something with 4 initials called L, lateral
vascular
neck restraint.
That's a chokehold.
Yeah, okay.
And a chokehold has different applications. There's actually several different types of chokeholds that.
But it too can be dangerous.
Oh, it can be very dangerous. One of the dangers is the proximity that the officer has to have to the person he's trying to subdue.
So it can be dangerous for
It can be
for
dangerous
the
for the
officer
officer as well as for the person who's being choked, because what you're doing is cutting off the flow of blood. And that poses with it certain sets of dangers.
So we should say that the Omaha Police Department started phased in the use of tasers in the year 2004.
Right. And they now have 59 tasers that are available for officer use. They're deployed among the 4 precincts. The first thing that we looked at was 4 years of data on use of force, 2001 through 2004. And in order to account for highs and lows, I took an average of the first 3 years.
In other words, the non-taser,
last
years.
non-taser
years.
The last 3 non-taser years. And what I found was that there was an average of 172 instances of all types of use of force. I then looked at 2004, and there was 338 uses of force in the year that tasers were introduced, and tasers alone counted for 170 of them. So the use of tasers increased the use of force by 96%.
From the average.
From the average, right. And when even if you go back and you just look at the prior year, tasers being introduced into the inventory would account for something like a 66% jump in total use of force. Any way you look at the police department's numbers, it's very apparent that tasers have had a major impact on the police department's use of force against citizens. We're not taking the position that tasers ought to be removed from the police inventory. I think anytime you give officers a tool to resolve a violent situation or a potentially violent situation without loss of life, that's valuable. So I think there is a role for tasers. The question that we're putting on the table for discussion is, where is the proper place at which an officer should be able to draw a taser and use it?
Now that gets us into what they call the use of force continuum.
Right.
Which is sort of the, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was looking at it from just a regular person's point of view, is that there are certain levels of escalating force.
Right.
And the bottom one, the lowest form, is just the presence of a police officer. In fact, assuming that there's some sort of, and I feel intimidated, some form of intimidation enough to calm somebody down or make them not do something stupid just by the presence of an officer, and then it goes up from there.
And the next step is verbal commands. You know, the
stop,
stop, or if you watch cops, you'll see that when they execute a search warrant, they're yelling at everybody all at once, get down,
hit
get down.
the floor, whatever.
You know, it's designed to kind of stop anybody from doing anything stupid.
And I keep people in the periphery
right.
from getting hurt too.
From getting hurt. And then the next step in the Omaha Police inventory or use of force continuum is what's called soft empty hand control.
Which I think is the most bizarre name, because it doesn't tell me much, but...
Well, it doesn't tell anybody much. Soft empty hand controls include things like leg sweeps, where the officer
gets that leg and
knocks a person down, handcuffing, use of chemical spray. And in Omaha, the soft empty hand control includes tasers. Soft empty hand control is not an appropriate response for aggressive behavior. It's designed to counter passive behavior. And that's why we think that tasers are placed too low in the force continuum.
We should probably mention, you mentioned that's the third level. There are 6 levels,
Right.
sixth being the use of lethal force.
Right.
Usually the weapon.
The pistol or
yeah.
firearms.
Yeah. So there's 2 levels in between there, and what you're saying is perhaps it should be moved up a little?
Right. You can see, if you look at what's going on in Lincoln, now statewide, we have responses back from 18 sheriff departments and police departments on their use of tasers. Tasers are not being as widely used in Nebraska as they are in some states. Only half the departments we've surveyed are actually using tasers right now.
Now, is that cost? Is that the type of, some of the smaller towns perhaps
Well,
have a better handle on their people? They might even know them personally?
Yeah, we looked at population as one element of who we were going to survey on the first round. And like Oglala isn't a huge town, but they have had disruptions out there, party season in the summer and so on. So we included Oglala in the mix. But of the departments that we surveyed, Lincoln, being the second largest department in the state, was of obvious interest to us. And we saw something pretty amazing when Lincoln reported back. Lincoln has been using tasers for 3 years. They have approximately 100 instances a year where they use force. Last year, they used tasers 7 times. In the 3-year total, they've only used tasers 11 times.
Okay, that's about 10% of the,
you're
of
talking,
the uses of force.
You're talking in comparison to Omaha, where it's half the uses of reported force, this is an amazing statistic. And when you read through the Lincoln Police Department policy, you'll see that they place the taser at a much higher level. They place it at the 5th step, along with the baton. Batons are very dangerous because a head strike can kill someone. So they place it very high in their force continuum, and as a result, the usage of it is very minimal. They use it primarily in cases involving mentally ill people who are attempting to kill themselves. We think that the Lincoln has got the right approach. That Chief Cassidy down there has properly placed tasers, whereas the Omaha Police Department, and they're only in their first year, things could change, they have got them so low that the officers are using them more out of convenience than out of need.
Okay, now, in fairness to the Omaha Police Department, there are some other statistics that Police Chief Warren pointed out. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but he said that the number of injuries to officers has decreased, which means for some reason in the past, if you massage
Right.
the figures, perhaps they took risks they shouldn't have. And I mean, you're really going to have to look at, and then he said citizen complaints have actually gone down for use of force. So this is not a simple thing to flesh out the hows and whys.
It isn't simple, but I think tasers are something that we have to err on the side of caution.
Now, did he not say that this was a work in progress?
He did say it was a work
I
in
mean,
progress.
He left the door. He didn't dig his heels in and say, "By golly, this
No.
is." As I've heard from certain police chiefs in the past on a number of issues.
No, I think the chief is very open to the information that came out at that forum, and I'm hoping that there will be a change in the Omaha police policy. The controversy is springing up nationally because of deaths.
Okay, now this is another thing that really needs some.
You have to be very careful in how you describe this. And I want to be clear that there has not been one reported incident where someone was shot with a taser
And died.
immediately.
Within immediate or very close proximity.
However, there have been deaths in days and up to a week following the application of taser, and there are 17 or 18 autopsies that have been done where the coroner has listed a taser application as being a contributing factor. Amnesty International has been tracking taser use since 1999, and their figure for the United States and Canada is 103 deaths following the use of tasers. Now, admittedly, Amnesty International is an advocacy organization. It's also an advocacy organization that has so much integrity, it's been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize.
But
So-
boy, you can say either ACLU or Amnesty International, two A words, or in this state, and you're automatically suspect. I mean, so,
Well-
but I know they do have a general amount of darn good credibility, at least worldwide.
They are very credible worldwide. They're credible in the United States. I'm not willing to make the leap that all 103 of those deaths were caused by tasers. I think all 103 of them should be looked at very carefully. But while we're in this period, there's mixed medical evidence. Tom Smith, the president of Taser International, at the forum on Tuesday night, gave a very lengthy description of the medical testing that they've done and their
And that others have done.
and that others have done, and their guarantees of safety with using the weapon. On the other hand, at the American Academy of Forensic Examiners meeting in February, an electrical forensic examiner that's highly respected got up and said, let's admit it, the taser can kill. And he put this little caveat on it that, you know, he wasn't calling for the removal of tasers from use, but that police departments had to be very careful with how they and when they use them. The International Chiefs of Police last week issued a report basically warning police departments to go back and study carefully how they're using tasers, when they're using tasers.
And that's the key, and Chief Warren pointed that out. They didn't question, at least in this point, the Chiefs of Police organization, the technology itself, but the management of it. And
Right.
that they encouraged all police departments using it to really relook at how they're doing it.
And that's all we're talking about now is the management of taser use. As I said earlier, we're not calling for their removal from the inventory. I think that you have to develop and you have to make available to police officers weapons that will allow them to do their job so that they can go home at night to their families and in the process not have to kill anybody that, except in the most extreme of circumstances. I can only imagine how an officer would feel if he uses a taser and 3 days later finds out that the person he shot with a taser has died. It wasn't his intention to kill anybody. It's got to be devastating. And as Tom Smith pointed out, when officers shoot someone with a handgun, their career ends shortly thereafter. Most of them
It said
cannot.
within 5 years.
Within 5 years, they're off
generally,
the force.
They can't take it for whatever reason.
Well,
just,
it's a horrible burden to carry with you.
Right. That they relive that, and
right.
there's like post-traumatic stress disorder involved oftentimes. Let me ask you this. Looking back over the years that I've covered news, and everything evolves. I remember when the use of lethal force in general, which is not, I'm not saying this is necessarily lethal force, but I remember even in relatively recent times in law enforcement, we have had serious looks at when guns should even be used, when guns should be drawn, when, you know, don't do certain things unless you intend to use it. I mean, too much use of weapon. I mean, not so much here, but I mean, this has been...
Well, there's been a growing professionalization within
Correct.
police, and that's been part of it, is that, you know, 100 years ago, you had a different way of policing the world.
Cowboy.
Yeah, a cowboy mentality and, you know, street justice and the whole bit. But especially in the wake of what happened in the 1960s, the police response to the civil rights movement and what happened with anti-war demonstrators, that began to create a drive for more professionalism within the police department. The Omaha Police has a high number of officers on duty who are college graduates.
In law enforcement.
In law enforcement. And, you know, there's been a whole field of academic study that has sprung up around the issue of criminal justice.
We have an outstanding scholar here, at least one, Sam Walker.
Right.
But this,
you know,
this is
all in the grand scheme of things. This is all relatively new, and this controversy about lethal force and how force is used in any situation is been something that has developed over the last 20 to 30 years, and there's still room for it to grow. Most police departments follow a 6-step use of force continuum. Not all of them. I've seen in our survey, we found a couple that only use 5 steps, but most of them use 6.
But they graduate in similar ways.
They graduate, and it's a step-by-step response. If the offender, the suspect is doing this, this is the appropriate use of force.
Chief Warren mentioned, and I believe also his officer, Staskowitz, that demonstrated, I mean, he didn't tase anybody, but he showed the baton and the taser, and he's a training officer for taser certification. Right. They talked about the +1 kind of school of thought in terms of using force, that you go one step higher, which
makes sense.
Which makes sense to me, because if you were just going to go at it even Steven all the time, people could get hurt.
Right. But see, at least they're thinking in terms of +1 and not +3.
I mean, all of a sudden +3 is what you're saying.
Right. That you don't go into a situation where you're arresting a shoplifter and shoot him. We've come a long way from the days when that's happened, and as I said, there's still room to grow, and I think the taser controversy provides us with an opportunity as a society to look into how law enforcement works. Law enforcement policy is generally developed in the back rooms of the police department by the chief and his staff and his managers. This chief has shown a willingness to come out and talk about policy in the open. I won't call it revolutionary, but it's certainly startling that we have a police chief in the city of Omaha that's willing to listen to the public as he considers policy options.
And not without trauma. I mean, the times I've heard that that's been done, particularly in the very large cities with severe crime problems, that some egregious acts have happened on the part of, or alleged on the part of the police department or police officers, that force a chief to come out and sort of face the public.
Right. We're not in the midst of a huge, massive crisis here. Nobody has died from taser use yet. We would hope that nobody ever does in Omaha, or anywhere else for that matter. So we have an opportunity here for dialogue, reflection, and I hope movement forward with the chief reevaluating how to place tasers in the use of force continuum.
You better watch out, because some people in this state might actually think you're taking a reasonable approach to this.
Well, I think we've always been reasonable.
I know, but you know what I'm saying. There are a lot of people that the ACLU is a 4-letter word.
Well,
that, and so I just,
those are the people that turn on the radio and they listen to Rush Limbaugh or Michael Savage or Bill O'Reilly and think that what they're hearing is the truth. If people want to know about what the ACLU does, they should visit our websites and look for themselves what kind of cases we litigate, what kind of educational activities we undertake. I'm proud to work for the ACLU. I've been working for the ACLU for 5 years. I've been a member for over 30 years, and I think that the ACLU right now is more important than it's ever been.
Okay, I'll let you have the commercial. One of the things that happened, a horrible thing that happened in the news recently, was the situation in Atlanta where the man was being transported to court, had threatened the judge previously, overtook the officer that was escorting him. The officer had to give up, in this case it was her weapon, but now they're talking about and using, or at least bringing out in the open that they've used them and can use them, are these stun belts.
Right.
Where the corrections officer that's escorting, or plural that are escorting, have some sort of a thing that can activate a receiver that's on the person, I think the small of their back or something. And this might have prevented that situation. So
Very well could have.
So this is a good use of, in theory, if properly used.
Theory.
And it sounded like there's not a...
Actually, they've been in use at the Douglas County Courthouse for several years, and there was just a news report saying that they'd had their first
incident
of using it. And that was supposed to have happened, I believe, yesterday. We're taping on a Thursday, so it happened on Wednesday. However, I had a call at my office last week from someone claiming that a stun belt had been used the week prior.
And then you don't know if used under what circumstance.
We don't know what circumstance, and I also, when people call up and they don't leave their name and give us a way to follow through, do you really trust the information? I don't know.
But the point is that
the point is that stun belts can be terribly effective, as tasers can, in diffusing a potentially dangerous situation.
or
And
keeping them from happening just because the word gets around that you don't want to be, as they
Right.
say, tased.
Right. And the question then becomes one of appropriate policy development, appropriate training, and making sure that the culture inside the department using that is such that there's a respect for what that belt or that gun can do.
There was an officer at this hearing, Virgil Patlin, who's president of the Latino Officers Association, who threatened to use one, he said, just last Saturday. He had a situation where a man allegedly had a knife, had already injured or assaulted 2 people, and he didn't have backup yet. And so he said, pulled the taser and said, I'm going to tase you if you don't stop or whatever. And he said, the guy said, I don't really want that to happen to me, and kind of fell into line. And he said that he has a great deal of respect for the power of the taser because in training, they were tased.
Yes.
He said it was the most awful pain he's ever experienced.
I can only imagine what 50,000 volts would do to you and how painful that would be to have your muscles so rigid. But it's an important thing. I mean, for officers to have a cavalier attitude towards this weapon, to consider it a toy.
Yeah, and we don't know if it is
and
that,
we-
but that's
no,
what you're
but
saying. We need to look.
We need to look at that, not just in the Omaha Police Department, but it's a question to be addressed nationally. We don't want a cavalier attitude towards these kind of weapons. We need more officers having Lieutenant Patlin's approach of this thing is harmful, this thing is painful, I don't want to use it without a real need. So the stun belts, you know, there's a lot of potential there. I mean, you get a corrections officer that has it in for someone who's escorted, you know, you might have a problem.
On the other hand,
and the stun belts, as far as I can tell from what I've read about them, don't have the accountability measures that tasers do.
Well, maybe that's something you'll have to work on.
Right.
We've run out of time, as we
Okay.
always do, Tim. Thank you so much. Tim Butts from the ACLU Nebraska. His website's been on our show. You can catch it on our website and latch up with him if you want. Thank you for joining us this week on Consider This.
To view this edition of Consider This or past programs, visit our website at unotv.unomaha.edu. For comments or questions, call 402-554-2516 during regular business hours. Consider This is a production of UNO Television.